Hi, welcome back. My name's Chris. I'm a French teacher. We communicate, we do bilingual lessons, we make your journey into French easier precisely by being bilingual. That's what we do. We make your journey into French easier. And today we'll be talking about whether grammar's important when learning French. I'll be reading a blog post I wrote about this very question, which I'll be posting beneath the video. You'll have the full link to the article if you wish to read it. And I'll be sharing with you today my professional experience and my take on grammar. Let's start. The quick answer is yes. A minimal amount of grammar is necessary when learning French. And if you've had your answer to a question, you can stop here, because all the rest is going to be me explaining why I believe it's important. You can stop watching now if you wish. For those of you who wish to know why I think that, I'll start to explain. I think we can compare grammar to working in a wood shop and doing a piece of DIY construction. If we start to call everything a tool, we're making it harder for ourselves and for others. A saw is not a nail, is not a hammer. We can't overlook this fact and call them things without developing an interest in what a hammer actually does. I think that much makes sense. Now, luckily for us, there are only 8 tools in languages. Any sentence you make, every word you use falls into one of 8 categories, which means that any sentence you see, all these words fall into one of 8 categories. Among the 8, there are adjectives, nouns, and verbs. Why is it important to know whether a word, as we sometimes call them, is any of each? Well, simply because these 8 types of words don't all behave in the same way, and they don't behave in the same way between English and French. And it's exactly the same thing as knowing that a hammer serves to hit on things and that sandpaper makes wood smoother. Let's look at an example. The word nice is an adjective. It's a type of word, one of the 8 words that we mentioned, that serves to describe things. The car is nice. Nice describes what the car's like. All adjectives in English behave in the same way, minus a few exceptions. By knowing how they behave, you can predict what's going to happen until you do it instinctively. You do it enough times, it becomes instinctive. So it's like a wood shop. At one point, you no longer need to think which tool to use because you know how it behaves as a tool. And language learning works in this way also. Coming back to our English adjectives, the rule says that they never react to the plural. It doesn't matter if it's he is nice or they are nice, that the word nice hasn't changed. But however, in French, it's not the same. What that means is the car is nice or the houses are nice. Nice, the word nice hasn't changed. It doesn't work that way in French. When the subject is plural in French, they, for example, the adjective nice will take on the letter S. The French adjective shows how many people or things are involved. So imagine the difficulty if you call it a word. You wouldn't know which problem you're trying to solve. You see? So this is why I think that at least at the bare minimum, knowing what word is what. There are 8 types of words. You can't just call nice a word. Because if you don't know that nice is an adjective, you don't know what problem you're trying to solve. You won't know the difference between he is nice and they are nice and why nice takes an S. By knowing that nice is an adjective and not just a generic word, you'll also know that it will behave in a certain way because you know the pattern it follows. In my teaching of French, I keep grammar to a minimum because I think it's possible to do too much grammar easily. Past a certain point, it becomes a waste of resources, obviously, instead of a tool for progress. And especially in high schools, some teachers speak of noun phrases and prepositional verbs. I don't believe in that. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it serves any purpose to know whether something is a noun phrase or a prepositional phrase. But a minimum is important, just to know which problem you're trying to solve. Of the 8 types of words, I recommend knowing verbs, adjectives, adverbs, nouns, and pronouns. I'll repeat that. I think it's important when you see a sentence, when you're using French, to know whether it's a verb, an adjective, an adverb, a noun, or a pronoun. Now the last 3 are prepositions, conjunctions, and determiners. I don't think it's crucial to be able to recognize and name them. So at least those 5. I think it's important. My advice to you would be to recognize at a minimum those 5 words, those 5 types of words. It can be hard coming from the English language, but it's definitely worth the investment. I'd even go as far as to say that it's necessary to be able to recognize those 5 types of words. And in the rest of the video, I hope to demonstrate why I think that. So just to confirm, I think it's important to know verbs, adjectives, adverbs, nouns, and pronouns. And you can drop prepositions, conjunctions, and determiners. It's not important to know what they're called. I don't think it will help you very much in learning French, but at least those 5. Now, let's now look at a real case situation. The sentence, I'm giving you my number, is translated, je te donne mon numéro. What does the word te mean in this sentence? Well, te is a pronoun that means to you. I to you give my number. The role of pronouns is to replace other words. Once we know what class of word te belongs to, we can ask ourselves how many others there are, and whether they all follow the same pattern of behavior. Je te donne mon numéro, well, what is te? It's a pronoun, what does it do? And do all pronouns behave in the same way? And then you learn to know the rules of the game. But if you don't know that te is a pronoun, you don't know the rules of the game. Or at least it's going to be very hard. The fact is that pronouns such as te go in front of the verb in French. But if we don't know what a verb is, we're quite navigating in the dark. Another example, in French we say, I lift the suitcase, je porte la valise, but we don't say, I lift it. We say, I, it, lift, because the pronoun goes in front of the verb. So we quickly see that I give you and I lift it shows a pattern in French. All these pronouns are behaving in the same way. So each time we use a pronoun, it went in the exact same place in front of the verb. Not knowing this rule will take considerable amounts of time before understanding what's going on. And this is why I think that grammar's useful. Once you know what a pronoun is, how many there are, and how they behave, you can start to apply that rule to as many sentences as you want. Let's now talk about why we don't know grammar in English, or why we tend not to know grammar in English. I think that the reason speakers of English don't know grammar can be explained by 3 main reasons. Well, the first is that grammar rather serves for the upper levels of English, when we want to speak proper. And how many native speakers have you heard, I don't know my grammar. It's a different language from French. The second is the nature of English. Not all languages have the same priorities. For example, German obviously has a higher need to know what declensions are. And declensions are often caused by verbs and prepositions. So if you don't know what a preposition is in German, it's going to be very hard to understand what's going on in the sentence. Contrary to German, you might remember that I mentioned that prepositions I don't think were that important in French. You don't need to name them. So different priorities according to different languages. English is a language that people can just repeat, while knowing a minimal amount of grammar. And we see this worldwide to, varying degrees of success. People have a tendency to repeat and include their own accents. They can also get by with simplified conjugation in sentences. In English, barely any adjectives are necessary, and sentences can be a lot shorter. Different priorities according to different languages. French has different priorities. It's a conjugation-based language. The pronunciation of French is also more unified. Adjectives have a more complex functioning than in English. The third reason is cultural. English language is now the worldwide language, but most importantly, English belongs to no authority. Everyone around the world has complete freedom to use English as they choose. You can literally pronounce English as you want. If tomorrow I want to start saying a house instead of a house, I can. Now it becomes my problem if no one understands me, but there's no rule within the English language that prevents me from saying, instead of saying a microphone, I might say a microphone, but it's my choice. I can literally do that in English if I want. A microphone. Just pronounce English as you want. So there's a lot more freedom in English, which is why grammar isn't such a big part of the program. Native speakers of English have little use to speak eloquently with brainy words or long sentences. There's no societal pressure in the UK, Australia, New Zealand or America to speak beautifully. You can say very simple things in English. There's no pressure to speak posh or to make brainy sentence constructions. In English we have the possibility to share big ideas with simple words. We can limit our vocabulary to great and bad. I always say, all you need to do is know 6 adjectives in English. It's great, it's bad, it's awful, it's cool. You can get by with very little, and you can still be understood. The codes of communication of French are not the same, and there's more of a social tradition to speak well. And we see this especially in American politics. If you compare an English politician, a British politician with an American politician, the way they use the language is completely different. And even more so if you compare it to France. You listen to Macron speak, it's hyper brainy. There's very, very high level literary French. And you hear an American politician speak, they speak in a very accessible way. And in a lesser measure, the English political class does that also. But certainly compared to French, France I mean, the French language, it's a lot less brainy because there isn't that cultural need. So to conclude on French grammar, this is a very short video. From my personal observations, not knowing the bare minimum in grammar causes problems to speakers of English when they learn French. It's especially noticeable in verbs. When students, for example, say, I like to play sports, they often translate it to j'aime de jouer au sport. So the quick explanation would be to say, to play is the verb. What do you like? The action of playing. To play is a verb and it's called the infinitive. But if a student doesn't understand these notions, if they say, what are you talking about? A verb? A what? It's going to be very hard to explain that. I should be able to say, you like what? The action of playing. Okay, well, the action of playing is in 2 words. To play is the name of the action. This is why you don't have to say j'aime de jouer. Otherwise you're just doing a literal translation. But if your mind isn't tuned to these types of explanations, it's going to be very hard. And this typical problem always comes from an insufficient knowledge of grammar, in my experience. I think it may be more wise to draw the line between superfluous and useful when we speak of grammar. It should be a tool before all else. It should be a useful tool and provide reliable explanations and even shortcuts. Grammar for the sake of grammar quickly falls into the role of pointing out mistakes, and that's not very useful when you're learning. I think at a minimum you have to know that you have to understand that there are 8 types of words in any sentence. You have to understand that, well, this is a noun, this is a verb, this is an adjective, this is an adverb. Otherwise you don't understand what problem you're trying to solve. For example, the word rapide, it means quick, and rapidement, which translates to quickly. The role of the adverb rapidement says something about the verb. How do you speak? You speak quickly. Rapide is an adjective, it doesn't describe a verb. So you can't say tu parles rapide. You speak quick. Might work in English but not in French. And once you know that the role of adverbs is to describe, well, verbs and other parts of sentences also, if we use grammar in the context of a language lesson, if we use it well, it provides shortcuts. My purpose when I do language classes, I always tell students that I would like them to understand what they're doing, because the day I'm not there, I would like them to be able to find answers by themselves. That's the whole point. And with a minimal amount of grammar, they'll know what solution they're looking for. We can compare it to DIY. Again, let's imagine we're trying to drill a hole in a wall. We have a drill, we want to drill a hole. Well, if you don't know that there are different surfaces, different resistances, different, what do you call it, the drill bit, you call it the bit on the drill, well, you don't know what solution you're trying to solve. If you've never investigated the question of material resistance or even voltage, or how to properly hold it, and the security measures such as plastic glasses, you don't understand the problem you're trying to solve. It's the same thing in language, and I can give you another example. For example, you say je lui parle. I to him speak. You don't say je le parle. But a person who doesn't know about grammar doesn't know that parler leads to an indirect pronoun. Je lui. It's like donner. Je lui donne. I to him or to her give. Je lui donne. Je lui parle. If you're not aware that there's a list of verbs that sort of give way, that cause an indirect pronoun to happen, you're going to have to encounter each case of these individually, hope to understand what's going on when you hear these things, and draw your own conclusions. But you might hear one time, je le donne, je la donne, and sometimes you might hear je lui donne. And you might think, why? What's going on? What problem am I trying to solve? Why is it sometimes je la donne, je lui donne, and je le donne? But if you know what you're looking for as an answer, it's going to make your journey into French a lot easier. And I've seen it many times myself. The best students that I've had the pleasure to teach could all find their own solutions. And this is what I'm trying to do in my classes. So a minimal amount of grammar, I think, is definitely necessary. And I'll leave you with a little anecdote. I'm sure you've heard of The Simpsons. In one of the episodes, I think it was Marge. She was on a plane. They were going to a Hispanic country. I don't know if it was Spain or it was a country in which they spoke Spanish, and she was studying during the flight with a little phrase book. And someone from that culture, from the Spanish-speaking country, said, "Do you know how insulting it is to our country that you think that Spanish is so simple that you really think that you could learn it with a phrase book during the flight?" Because we forget that languages are linguistic systems. They're systems that are regulated by rules and laws. You can even call them laws. If you don't know those rules, you'll be repeating phrases, but then that also implies that each time you encounter a new phrase, you won't quite understand what you're hearing or why this phrase is like that and that one's over here is like this. But if you find yourself a teacher who's properly able to weigh the grammar and separate what's useful from what's superfluous, you'll find yourself having tools that are going to accelerate your learning of French. It's going to become an active tool for shortcuts. This is a proper way of learning grammar, and of course, a way that's pushed too far. That's just going to slow you down. That was my piece on grammar. That's my professional opinion on grammar. I think it can be a tool. I think it's very useful, and I even think it's necessary. Thanks a lot for watching. My name's Chris from We Communicate. See you next time. Bye.